Shalom, this is Rabbi Adam Law from Toronto Lights and Or Yisrael. This week's Parsha is Parshas Terumah, and it speaks about building the Beis Hamikdash. I'd like to speak about some of the ideas and the arguments among the rabbis about what the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash is. First of all, I'd like to read a few of the Pesukim to open up in Parshas Terumah, to start explaining exactly where and why we build a Beis Hamikdash at all. Parshas Yisro, we receive the Torah after Parshas Bishalach, where the splitting of the Red Sea happened. Then in Parshas Mishpatim, we go from this great, awesome revelation of the giving of the Torah, where every Jew received the Torah according to their level, to an example to every Jew that even the little details of the world are very, very important in the eyes of Hashem and in the way of the Torah. Many people think religion is this grand idea, this great spiritual idea that's only there for amazing moments like birth and death and wedding, and maybe even for a holiday. But Parshas Mishpatim teaches us that we need to have God's reverence in everything we do. There's not a legal, separate church from state. There's no such thing. God's light in Torah is found in every detail of the creation. And that's what Parshas Mishpatim teaches us. After the grandeur of Har Sinai, we have to bring the Torah back down to earth and realize that everything in the world is regulated through this light. Just as the world is made of atoms and molecules and many small disparate parts, so too the little inner workings of the machine of the world is also run by God's holy ways through the Torah. So then we go to Parshas Terumah, which seems to kind of bring us back to this grandeur again, as it speaks about the building of the Mishkan, which also is going to be the Holy Temple itself. The first temple, the second temple, and even the third temple, which should be built very soon. The Ramban, Zetzal, basically says that this is supposed to replicate the Har Sinai experience. At the Har Sinai experience, we were all brought up to the highest level, and Hashem bent the heavens and the earth to come down here, and everything was revealed in an awesome way. And Parshas Mishpatim, as we spoke about also by Mara, where the Mishpat was originally given, is supposed to bring us down to the regular level. There's the high experience, the super experience of the holidays, or the Shabbos, or amazing Jewish concert, something which is going to make us feel so connected, something so deep. But then again, there's the everyday Mishpatim. But then according to the Ramban, Parshas Terumah actually comes to teach us about building the Mishkan, about building the temple, to bring us back to that sense of grandeur, the awesomeness of having this framework where God's spirituality and light is found, again, in this amazing way in the service which goes on every day, and which has special services for the holidays, and particularly Yom Kippur, where a Jew 3 times a year has to go up to the temple and experience this amazing experience of bringing sacrifices. And that for sins, and also for good things, we bring sacrifices. And there's a whole system of Kohanim, of priests, which have very regulated garments, which are dealt with next Parsha. And Levi'im playing music, and smelling of the amazing incense, filling our lungs with a delicious smell that nothing else was like it. And seeing the grandeur of the beauty of the Beis Hamikdash, the most beautiful, most important building that ever lived. This is supposed to incalculate us with this super high experience that we can have all the time, which is accessible to us when we go to the temple. So it's interesting that the Ramban says this, but the Rambam, who was his contemporary and argues with him a lot, basically says something very opposite. The Rambam, Maimonides, says the temple was built as a concession for man, and that really what we have now, the tefillah, as the Gemara says, because we don't have the Beis Hamikdash anymore, that our tefillahs and our Torah and reciting the sacrifices and talking about and learning about what was in the Beis Hamikdash, that actually replicates the Beis Hamikdash itself. But in the world of imagination and spiritual connection beyond the vessels, the physical, is actually a higher level. Which is actually quite interesting if you think about it, because the Ramban and the Derek of the Kabbalah and most of the mainstream Judaism really seems to think that the Beis Hamikdash itself is the ultimate and the highest, and not like the Rambam that really the spirituality of prayer is the highest. It seems to remind us of the machlokus between, again, the Raavad, the Ramban, and the mainstream Kabbalah aspect of Judaism, and Rambam about the Messianic era. Whereas the Rambam seems to think that after the Messianic era, that after the Mashiach comes, and we have the Hevlei de Mashiach, all the difficult problems, then we're going to revert to this world of souls, where again, our soul is in union with God and having the spirituality of Torah, but disconnected. The part where our bodies, Techias Amesim, are reunited with our souls, and as in the vision of Yechezkel, is a temporary period. But again, the highest period is our souls being separate from our bodies and just experiencing God's light. But the mainstream Jewish tradition again says that actually our bodies do separate from our souls, and they do bask in the pure light of Hashem, in the light of Torah that we learn. But yet ultimately, one day, as in the vision of Yehezkel, the dry bones, our bodies will be reunited, Techias Amesim will happen, and our souls and bodies will be together, and that will be the ultimate reality. That the physical vessel itself is the ultimate reality. And that seems to remind us here of this argument about the Mishkan, the purpose of the Mishkan, and the temple itself. That there's these physical vessels, this Aron, this Ark of the Covenant, this table with bread on it, the holy bread that the Kohanim replaced every Friday, and they would eat after a week, and it would always taste fresh, but it was really there for Hashem, the showbread. The holy menorah, which represented the light being brought out to the whole world. The altar, which sacrifices went up in a straight line and burning up in a straight pillar to Hashem. And of course, the golden altar, the incense altar with the amazing smell, the most sublime of all the senses as it enters inside our body. And the incense has a very deep mystical connection. That seems to be that according to the mainstream Jewish tradition, the physical itself, God's spirituality can rest in the physical. God can make a dir b'tachtonim, and that is the main purpose of the Beis HaMikdash and all the vessels and all the services around it. That God's light rests in this world and everything. It's not the ultimate thing just to be in the world of the Seichel, sort of like the Rambam is saying, in this upper world, above and beyond, but yet to be here in this world and bring God's light in this world. And that's why the Ramban says that all the spiritual tikkunim, everything in Parshas Terumah is exactly in its place. In the right part of the Torah, right here after Mishpatim, after we bring God's light down into the details, we also see how we can find God's light in the physical, in the highest sense, like the replication of Har Sinai. It's interesting because, though I don't want to say Rashi and Sforno necessarily agree with the Rambam, or that they even knew each other's opinion necessarily, nevertheless, the Rashi and Sforno go by the idea that we find in the Gemara that Ein Mukdam V'Muchar B'Torah. There's an idea that sometimes not every parsha is in the right place, and that it seems to be this idea of Terumah actually, the Parshas Terumah, the Beis HaMikdash, actually occurs in the Torah right here, but actually really happens after the golden calf. Meaning is, maybe we had this super high experience of godliness, and then we had this ultimate fall, because we couldn't bring it back down to earth. And then God gives us the tikkun. Here's the Beis HaMikdash. Here's the way. You want to serve God through a physical way, but you messed up by making your own idol. I want to show you that you can serve God through physicality. You can bring spirituality through a physical vessel, but you have to do it in my way. And that's why everything is perfectly regulated. You see here through all these parshas, and through really much of the Torah, that all the sacrifices, all the vessels, all the measurements, even building the Mishkan, the temple itself, are all perfectly regulated. Everything is regulated. And why? Because to bring down God's light, as in these highest experiences, we have to have a vessel to do so. Right? We can't just have a fire out of nowhere. You must have a physical vessel for God's light to rest on. The pasuk really is amazing, that it says, when it's talking about building the temple, it says, "V'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'socham." Build me a temple, build me a mishkan, a tabernacle, and I will dwell among them. The Shekhinah will dwell among them. Not only it, among them. That the way for us to be connected to God is for us to build the mishkan, to build the vessels, to bring down God's light. Not necessarily just as a concession to human nature, but as a lichatchila, God brings it down here. So it's sort of interesting that we have these juxtapositions. Again, the Ramban says it's in the proper place, that the Torah is in the proper place, Parshas Terumah is in the proper place. We build the Mishkan as a way to replicate the Har Sinai experience. Sforno and Rashi don't necessarily comment on that exactly, but they do say it's actually not in the proper place, and that it happened after the golden calf. That actually, this whole parsha happens after the golden calf. The golden calf happened after Har Sinai, and we get the Parsha Terumah actually afterwards. And that's just sort of a segue. They're sort of moving around the Torah for cinematic purposes. We see things in a different place. But the truth of the matter is it happens afterwards, because as a tikkun, for the fact that we tried to serve God in a physical way, and we made an idol represent God, and wanted God's light to rest on the idol, God says, I understand your physical nature. Your physical nature, therefore, requires that you serve God in the physical. And this actually is a big idea of Chassidus as well. That we can serve God through the Gashmias. That there's sometimes an idea in Torah that we have to be porish, we have to separate from everything, separate from money, separate from physicality, separate from the things that seem good in the world. But that really isn't necessarily a true Jewish idea. That seems to be another religion, that the next world is the place, and this world is just a place of suffering. It's true, this world is just a prose door, and the next world is the main place. But nevertheless, in this world, in this physicality, if you use things for the proper purpose, you can bring them up. Rabbi HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, was the richest man. He had everything, every fresh fruit and out of its season he had. But yet he said he didn't benefit one tiny little bit from his riches. Meaning is, all the riches he had, everything he did it for Kavod Shemayim. He did it to bring us God's light in the world. And that's what the Parsha of the Mishkan represents. It represents that we can bring God's light into this world by our heart, Kol Isha Yevenu Livo, that every Jew who has a heart desire to serve God can get that object and bring it closer to serve God. I want to talk again a little bit more about the Rambam's opinion, though. The Rambam basically believes that the Mishkan itself was, again, just a concession to human nature. Rambam generally believes that the seichel, the intelligence, the philosopher, is the highest level that a person can reach. And the mitzvahs and this world is really a means to an end, but the ultimate is to shed this world and to go on to a world of pure spiritual intellectual bliss. And therefore, he says, because people were accustomed to doing sacrifices, they were accustomed to doing avodah zarah through these ways, God had to wean us off of it. He had to wean us off of it by giving us a means to satisfy that urge which we had to serve in a physical way, and remove the idol worship element, and bring that service into the service of God. If you ever read books like Homer, you will see that this actually has a ringing of truth to it, that when you see there that the Greeks actually did serve their idols in a very similar way, with cutting of the throat, and bringing wine libations, and bread libations, etc., and bringing domestic animals, and serving God through that way. But not God, it was actually idol worship. So we see that there is some sort of seichel to what the Rambam is saying. And that really the Rambam says that ultimately, the ultimate purpose that we're getting into now, where our prayers, our lips represent what we did in the past. Of course, they always say, that's what Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim, and he's trying to explain things in a philosophical way. But if you open up the Mishnah Torah itself, the Rambam admits that in the third Beis HaMikdash there will be korbanos, there will be sacrifices, there's going to be a third Beis HaMikdash, and everything is going to be beautiful like the way it was. So it's Tzarich Iyun, it's never been explained satisfactorily why the Rambam seems to say, contradict himself. Maybe it's just the obvious fact that in Yehezkel there are visions that there's going to be a third Beis HaMikdash. There's going to be a third Beis HaMikdash, so therefore we have to bring it down. Rambam's not going to avoid that. So it's hard to understand exactly what's going on with the Rambam there. But nevertheless, everybody has to agree that Rambam believes the intellectual, the spiritual, is higher than the physical. Whereas the mainstream, Kabbalistic and Hasidic aspect of Judaism says that no, the Mishkan itself is a vessel. Maybe it's a tikkun to fix what we did in the golden calf, but nevertheless is incredible spiritual levels that can be brought through this type of service, through the physical service of the grandeur and beauty of the Beis HaMikdash, the korbanos, the daily service, and the holy service of Yom Kippur of the Kohen Gadol. So I just want to bring one more Torah, which I think is very, very touching. The Mei Shalach, which is one of my favorite Sfarim, brings down an amazing idea. Really, it's found, according to my Rebbe, it's found originally in the Kli Yakar. If you look at all the vessels in this week's Parsha, which we build, the first one that's brought is the Aron, the Ark, the Holy Ark, which is made out of gold. It was wood with a gold inside and gold outside, with two poles to carry it, and on top were two keruvim, two golden angels. And God's voice, the prophecy, would come from between the poles. God's voice would actually dwell and rest in that place, and that is where Moshe Rabbeinu and other people would hear the prophecy of God. So it's a very amazing spiritual thing, and that also is where the luchos were stored, both the brocha luchos and the the full Luchos, the second Luchos, the second covenant, tablets of the covenant which Moshe Rabbeinu received. We know that represents Torah because the Luchos represent Torah, and represents the brain, because the Torah represents the brain. It represents a wisdom and seichel, which is found in a person's brain. The Ishbitzer points out an interesting thing, and as my Rebbe said, also the Kli Yakar says similarly, that of all the different vessels, which all their perfect measurements are given, only the Aron, the measurements are given in halves. It says it's 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. 2.5 length, amos length, by 1.5 amos width, by 1.5 amos height. These are the measurements of the Aron. All the other vessels have some half numbers and some whole numbers. So why is the Aron in halves? The Ishbitzer says an amazing thing. It says to get Torah, which the Aron represents because the Torah is inside there. To get Torah, you have to realize you're chaser. You're lacking something. Alright? Torah is mashlim kol chasronos. Will fill all of your lackings. Anything which you're lacking in the world, only through Torah will you fulfill it to your highest potential. And that when we realize that we're little, that we're small, that we're nothing, then we can makabel Torah. When we're a glass that's full, you just pour water in there, it's going to overflow. When you realize you're empty and you're nothing, and without Hashem's awesome, infinite wisdom, you're nothing, then you can receive the Torah. That's why the Aron is in halves, because you have to realize you're half, you're lacking, you're missing something. Until you realize you're missing something, you're never going to get Torah. You can't get Torah just as a wisdom, just like you study in college, or you study something, science for interesting way, things to learn. Torah is different than that. You have to realize that you need Torah like you need bread, like a fisherman needs fish. You need it as your basic survival when you're lacking, because Torah fills everything. As the Baal Shem Tov says in the Pasuk, Torah Hashem Tamima Meshivas Nefesh, meaning is you're missing part of your soul. But the Torah is tamima, it's perfect, it's unsullied, because the Torah and Hashem and Israel are all one, and we all have a letter in the Torah. And we let go and become part of the greater whole, become part of the 600,000 letters of the Torah, and let the Torah, the infinite light and wisdom of Hashem, fill us up. We will become whole. Torah Hashem tamima, the light of Hashem is tamima, the Torah of Hashem is perfect, it's infinite, Meshivas Nefesh, it will return to us, our soul, but only when we become ayin. When we become bittul, when we become nothing, when we realize that we're lacking, that is the only time the Torah can have an effect on us. When we have a tiny little bit of arrogance in Torah, anything which is not batal b'shishim, because you're allowed to have 1/8 of arrogance in Torah, but it has to be batal b'shishim. If you have any visible arrogance in Torah, if you ever show down another Jew because of your Torah wisdom, if you use Torah as a crown to beat down anybody, rather you realize that Hashem's Torah is infinite and you need it, and you're lacking, and there's always an infinite amount of Torah out there, you'll never get Torah. When you become nothing, when you have Yiras Hashem, and you have awe and fear and embarrassment before Hashem, and you realize you're nothing and Hashem is awesome, then you have just started the beginning of the derech of moving towards God. Because Torah Hashem Timum Meshivas Nefesh. When you realize you're half, like the measurements of the Aron, then you're ready to get Torah. This is Rabbi Adam Law from Toronto Lights in Or Yisrael, wishing you a good week and a good Shabbos. Parshas Terumah. God bless you. Bye-bye.